Welcome back to Bombastic Nation, a ting. I'm Mr. Jet, and I'm back with some more vibe for all you. Yes, you know what I mean? And this one here is, well, somebody said, hey, you got to do geography in Brazil. And I think this episode looked like it's an earlier one. I think it's 2015. And this one is called Geography in Brazil, like I said, a thing, you know what I mean? And somebody said, hey, check it out. So hopefully everything is up to date here on Wagwan down there and thing like that. And let's see what you have to say and thing, you know. But before I do that, let me thank everybody for watching and thing with me. You know what I mean? And thanks for all the suggestions of things to watch and all of that. I have to admit, man, I really like doing this here, and for me, it's a learning experience. You know what I mean? Some people get in the comment section and they want to, you know, be contentious and stuff like that. I'm just trying to learn stuff. So, if you see anything that sort of is skewed there, don't just put up in the comment section and say, "Oh, this is so wrong. This is that." Tell me why it's wrong. So we could learn from each other. You know what I mean? Because I understand that history is usually told in a certain way, and especially if it's being told by somebody else's cultural perspective. So, you know, in the comment section, just tell a brethren what go on and thing, you know? Don't just dispute what is said with no context. Because I'm not going to learn anything. Other people who go down in the comment section to read to see what's going on, they aren't going to learn anything. If you think it's not true, let us know in the bottom section. You know what I mean? In the comment section, you know what the deal is. You know, I'm trying to learn some stuff. You understand what I mean? We got to learn what's around us so that we could understand each other and get along. I personally feel if the people know each other, we won't have as much conflict, because most conflicts is pretty much government and government induced, and whoever is in power is telling people this is what this person is doing to them, that is what that person is doing to them, and they eliminate the human element in things. You know what I mean? So then we could see the person as less of a human than we are. You know, people struggle. It looks bad. Doesn't make them less human because they're struggling. Just make them less human, maybe because they have corrupt government, maybe because people from the outside is terrorizing them and they don't have the power to change, you know what they are. And if they do have they get the power and then they start fighting back. You don't call them animals and vicious and stuff like that, because you don't know their struggles, because their struggles could be translated to you in political stuff and not in the human stuff. But anyway, I'm babbling on. Let's get to this one here.
Hey, geography. So Brazil is one of the largest countries in the world. Obviously, I won't be able to cover everything within about 10 minutes. I'll try to do my best. But in the meantime, soccer, monkeys, Amazon, Ronaldo, and samba songs, capoeira, anaconda.
Ronaldo is from Brazil?
Attractive people that kind of have like tan skin. Oh, come on, guys. You knew that was coming.
I didn't know he was from Brazil. Oh, hence he plays in Portugal. Oh, okay.
And after weeks of anticipation, we finally finished the Brazil video. And you know how we start these things. Let's dissect the flag.
Let's dissect the flag.
The flag of Brazil has a green field with a yellow rhombus in the middle and a blue disc in the center with 27 stars scattered throughout the disc, and the country's motto depicted on a white band sprawled across the blue disc. Some people might tell you that the green represents forests and yellow represents gold, but yeah, that's not really true. The green and yellow are actually inspired from the former imperial flag of Brazil, which was derived from two royal households, the green representing the House of Braganza for King Dom Pedro I, and the yellow for the House of Habsburg that his wife Maria Leopoldina came from. The blue disc and the stars are what make up the most fun part of this flag. Each star represents one of the 20.
See, I didn't know that Brazil had kings and all that stuff. Like we did there's two Pedros, 1 and 2, and I think they were deemed emperors and stuff. I did a reaction on him. Go check that one out too. I did a reaction on him. The second one, Pedro II. And I do believe his name is Pedro, but anyway, I did a reaction in my house. I didn't know that. You know what I mean? And I'm from that region, but we the only thing, and I know this is bad, but the only thing I know about, I know about Colombia and Venezuela and Peru and Guatemala and stuff like that, but not as much about Brazil's history. And I think the reason why I know so much about Venezuela, well, Venezuela is really close to where I'm from. I think you get there by a half a day or a day in boat, depending depending on the speed of the boat. But Simon Bolivar is we learned a lot about him in high school. So then I know a lot about Venezuelan history and all that stuff there. But let's get on there. Let's get to Brazil.
Furthermore, they are all separated into 9 different constellations that you can typically see in the southern hemisphere. Straddling across the blue disc is a banner with the country's motto, Ordem e Progresso, which means order and progress. A flag with stars representing each state in the country. Brazil, I think there's some people that can gel well with that. Now here's where things get a little fun, because each section of Brazil kind of has its own little story. But first, Brazil is the largest country in the South American continent. If you grew up in Latin America, you would have been told that both South and North America are together one continent, but for pragmatic definitional reasons, we're just going to treat South America as a separate entity, as its own continent. Brazil's domain stretches all the way from the Atlantic coast and deep into the interior of the continent. Brazil is bordered by every single South American country except for Ecuador and Chile. You could also technically say that Brazil borders France. Why? Because of this little guy. French Guiana. That's right, this is not a country, but rather an overseas territory of France. It's okay, raise your hand if you just learned that. You're learning. The country's capital is the aptly named Brasilia, located slightly inland in the central west region of Brazil, and actually administers itself in its own federal district, much like Washington, D.C. Brasilia was actually built in 1960 as they were switching from the old capital, Rio de Janeiro. That's right, it's pronounced Rio de Janeiro, not Rio de Janeiro. Get it right, we're not in Mexico, this is Portuguese, not Spanish. This was done in an attempt to provide a more regional neutrality for the rest of the states in Brazil by centralizing the capital. Brazil is divided into 27 federative units, 26 of which are states, and 1 federal district, which is where the capital resides. Each state and region of Brazil has their own unique flavor that they bring to the table, and we'll discuss more about that in the demographics, but essentially it kind of goes like this. We grow food. We got all the money. We are so black. We are so white. Stop cutting our trees. In terms of disputes, Brazil has 2 disputed areas with Bolivia on the Mamoré River and 2 disputed areas with Uruguay on the Uruguay River and in the Maceió Rivera that nobody cares about. Funny backstory, Uruguay actually used to be part of Brazil, known as the Cisplatina province, yada yada yada. There was a war, they gained their independence. Brazil has a ton of islands off their coast, but the furthest reaches of the Brazilian domain would have to be the 4 island and archipelago chains in the Atlantic, Fernando de Noronha, the Rocas Atoll, the St. Peter and St. Paul Rocks, which is a non-permanent residence science lab station, and Trindade and Martin Vaz. Otherwise, the western mainland borders look kind of funny. If you look at the map, it kind of looks like Brazil has river Tourette syndrome, in which they have a lot of half rivers, but then they jump onto the next adjacent river, which is like a couple hundred kilometers away. It's like, I'll take part of the Rio Acre, but then, I'll cut through and make my way over to the Rio Purus. I'll take the Rio Santa Rosa, but then, I'll jump over to Rio Preu. This all had to do with centuries of disputes with the former empires, and today you have this massive piece of sovereign complexity. And that's just the borders. Wait till you see what's inside the borders.
Let's see here, Bart.
When you think of Brazil, everybody just kind of automatically defaults to one image, the Amazon. And yes, the Amazon is a very imperative factor to the nation's domain. However, there's a lot more to it in terms of landscape and terrain. First of all, about 60% of the entire Amazon rainforest is located in Brazil, mostly in the north region, and of course, no surprise, consists of the most heavily compact ecoregion on Earth. Out of all the 10 million species of animals and insects known to human beings, about half of them call the Amazon rainforest home. Many of the species that have yet to be discovered are still lingering about in the deep, uncharted depths of the Amazon today. Now, we all know that there's a huge deforestation problem going on in Brazil and the Amazon to provide more agricultural land. However, even Brazil's own citizens are
What's sad about it is that this was done in 2015 and the deforestation got worse. I was watching the news today and they were talking about the rate at which we destroying the earth, and the earth is changing. The biggest iceberg broke away or something like that. But there's all this natural disasters going on, like that are breaking records, and this is all in the last month. Fires, floods, storms, and it's breaking records like crazy. You know what I mean? Why do we think that if we keep messing with Mother Nature is not going to fight back? You know what I mean? I think this is a fight back so that she could reconstitute herself. You know what I mean? I don't think it's a total destruction. I think after we're gone, she's going to rebuild something. It might be different. There might be different species coming from it. Might be a different atmosphere. But it's going to rebuild. You know, we think because it's going to be the end for humans, but it's not going to be the end for other species. You know? It's a reconstitution of things. That's my humble opinion. You know what I mean? I just don't see it just disappearing. And even if it become a dark planet, stuff's gonna still survive here because we don't know if anything is living in those other dark planets up there. We don't.
Harshly criticizing the action. It's a little tricky though because with Brazil's rapidly growing population, more resources are demanded of the people. So it's kind of like, we get it, it's bad, but I mean, what do you want us to do? Our country is growing and we need to provide you people with more stuff. Use alternative methods! Like what? We're working on it! Otherwise, outside of the Amazon, the rest of the country has a vast array of contrasting scenery almost equally as fascinating. Along the coast, you have the Mata Atlântica, or the Atlantic Forest, the Cerrado, or the tropical savannas in the center. This is also the area where most farms and ranches can be found. Also, keep in mind, Brazil is one of the top countries in meat production and exports. In the south, you have the Araucaria, or the pine evergreen forests. In the north, you have the small mountains, especially close to the border of Venezuela, in which you can find one of the most notable natural landmarks being the tri-point border between Venezuela, Guyana, and Brazil, Mount Roraima, even though Brazil only owns about 5% of the mountain. But still, it counts. Roraima is one of the strangest looking flat-top plateau mountains with vertical cliffs almost perpendicular to the ground, earning it the label as one of the hardest mountains to climb. Fun side note, Mount Roraima was one of the areas that inspired the scenery for the Pixar movie Up, which is a great movie, by the way, go ahead, watch it. And with that said, Pixar and Disney, you can't sue me for copyright infringement rights for using a clip of your movie in my corner box here because in accordance with fair use limitation rights, I commented and gave a critique on your material. Just letting you know, you can't sue me. One of the most remarkably bizarre and unusual spots of the country, though, would have to be the famous flooded deserts of Lençois Maranhenses. This place, located on the north coast of the Maranhão state, is almost alien-like, as there are virtually no places like it on Earth. Essentially, it's a sand dune desert with abundant lagoons speckled throughout the entire region.
Now that's beautiful. I kind of would like to see that.
Nonetheless, the area draws
I want to move back to the island. I'll definitely take a trip to South America before they destroy everything.
Of elements in its scenery. It's not every day that you see a flooded desert. All right, let's talk about the Brazilian people. Biscoito, bolacha, biscoito, bolacha. Yeah, we'll explain what that means in a little bit. But first, now of course Brazil is incredibly diverse, but before we get into that little pie graph thingamajiglet that we always do here in the demographics section, I feel like it's very crucial to mention one important thing about Brazil's people. Now, everybody knows that one of the most dramatically unique traits of Brazil would have to be its people. When asked, what do you think a Brazilian looks like? The stereotype is somebody with a perfectly bronzed, toned body and with slight Germanic features. One reason why this stereotype has been perpetuated so extensively is because, in a strange way, it's kind of true. Over the course of a few hundred years since colonization, Brazil's population has actually virtually invented an entirely new race that never exactly existed before, and it makes up nearly half of the entire population. I'm talking about the Pardo people. Now, although the definition is vague and up for relative dispute, essentially this is the easiest way I can describe it. Pardo people are kind of like people that are either too white to be black or too black to be white, and there's probably a little bit of Amerindian in there. That being said, now let's jump into the pie graph. Brazil has about 202 million people, making it the fifth most populous country in the world, right behind
Probably more now.
47% of the people identify as white, about 43% identify as Pardo, about 8% are black, 1.5 Asian, and a very small portion, about 0.5% of the population, are Amerindian. Speaking of Asians, at about 1.5 million strong, Brazil is actually the country with the largest Japanese population outside of Japan. About 70% of whom live in the city of Sao Paulo. Asians have actually historically been migrating to Brazil for centuries. In terms of socio-regional distinctions, Brazil has quite the buffet of ethnic enclaves. For one, you can typically find more black people in the north, and especially in the Bahia state, where they make up over half of the entire population. This is also the area where you can disputedly find some of the best capoeira masters in the world, as it is believed to have originated in this area. In the south, and more specifically in the Rio Grande do Sul state, you have one of the largest white populations in the entire country, with immigrants coming from places like Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands. In fact, many of these places have remained relatively untouched by the rest of Brazil, and many of the communities still retain the mother language of the country the members of the community came from. Oh, and there's a joke in Brazil that nobody has met anybody from the state of Acre. It's so far and secluded that you may as well just call it North Bolivia. It's mine, Brazil! No, too bad, we won it in the war, it's still ours, deal with it. And of course you have the various native tribal groups. There are about 240 tribes that a little over 900,000 people claim to be a part of ethnically. The government has recognized 690 territories and reservations for these various people groups that make up about 13% of the entire country's landmass, nearly all of it localized in the Amazon rainforest. Brazil's governmental agency for tribal peoples has a list of about 80 uncontacted tribal groups that deliberately choose to remain disconnected from the rest of the world. The governmental agency speculates that there are still many unnamed, undiscovered tribes currently living in the vast uncharted forests of the Amazon. Culture-wise, it really depends on where you are in Brazil, but everybody knows that Brazil kind of has a very vibrant way that they carry themselves out to the rest of the world. The center of culture, disputably, being Rio de Janeiro, and the economic capital being Sao Paulo. Most of the population lives within driving distance of the coasts, so there is, in a sense, a prevalent beach culture, especially for the people on the east side of the country. Not everybody in Brazil loves soccer. In fact, many places prefer basketball, and skateboarding has actually been a huge thing that's been exploding over the past few years. And no, not everybody has been to a carnival. Oh, and another thing, there's currently a war going on in Brazil. It's been very brutal. It's been going on for decades, and it's getting quite intense right now. I'm talking about the cookie war. In Brazil, people will ridicule you if you pronounce the word for cookie differently from them, and especially it's a whole Rio versus Sao Paulo thing. People in Sao Paulo will call it bolacha, and the people in Rio will call it biscoito. This conflict has led to the violence and deaths, leading in the victimization of people caught in the crossfire. And you all. Now let's talk about their relationships. Now, Brazil kind of gets along with everyone, but he's kind of like that friend that ventures off and does whatever he wants while you wait in the hallway until he comes back from doing whatever he's doing. First off, pretty much all of their neighbor nations get along with them, although Argentina has a huge competitive hatred for Brazil when it comes to soccer. But all that aside, they have good relations and trade policies. Then, just like mentioned before the Angola video, they get along with other nations of the former Portuguese Empire like Angola, Mozambique, São Tomé and Príncipe, Cabo Verde, and so on. They even get along with Portugal and have no bitterness towards the former colonization. Now, when it comes to the US, for centuries they've been good friends and have a deep history of trade and alliances. However, recently Brazil has been kind of diddle-doddling off, making friends with other people that kind of give the US the old shifty eye. Then we have Venezuela and Cuba. Brazil has sided with the Venezuelan government more in the past few decades and has built a $1.5 billion port in Cuba. Then we have Iran. Recently, Brazil has been testing the waters on attempting to build ties with them, although they haven't really improved much recently. Nonetheless, Brazil is quite the popular guy. Not many people dislike Brazil, except for maybe the Brazilians in Brazil that may complain about their own country's administrative affairs, but that's a lesson you'll have to learn by talking to an actual Brazilian person, not me. Plus, we're almost out of time. In conclusion, Brazil is so much more than just the Amazon and soccer, and we didn't even scratch the surface of Brazil in this video. And to find out more, I recommend just talk to a Brazilian. Just remember which side of the cookie you're on. Stay tuned, Brunei is coming up next.
See, that's the advice, man. Talk to the people from there. Like, if I didn't do these reactions, I would not have known a lot of the stuff about the war, the Second World War, Britain's involvement, even Canada's involvement, you know, and even Russia's involvement, you know, because where we live here, nobody tells you about the other people's involvement. You hear about this country's involvement, you know, but you don't hear about, you know, everybody else's contribution, you know. Like the Africans, the Indians, and all of those you know, it was a world war for a reason. But you know, when you live, you know, I guess if you live in England, you get a British side. If you live in Germany, you get the German side. If you live in Africa, you hear stories about, you know, people going off to war. Because on our island, I heard stories about people on our island going off to the Second World War. But anyway, man, thank you guys for watching this with me and thing. I hope you all enjoyed it. Link in the description for this video. Geography now have some cool stuff you're going to watch. I'll check out to see if there's an updated version of this, and I may just react to that, because there's possibly a lot, well, no, not that there's possibly, because over the last few years there's a lot of political changes, and you know, the far left and the far right fighting, and the jailing of the far left president that supposedly was framed, you know what I mean? So things have changed there a lot. And South America, things changed a lot fast in South America, yeah, politically speaking. It changes quick. Anyway, thank you all for listening. Take care of each other. Go out and love a stranger, all right? Cool runnings.